I was the family's free babysitter for years. When I finally said no, my whole world turned upside down. Here's how one weekend changed everything. I, 21, have always been the go-to person in my family when it comes to babysitting. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings, and my older brother Jake, 32, has 2 kids ages 4 and 6. Ever since his first child was born, I've been stepping in to help with the kids. At first, it was no big deal. I was a teenager, and I loved my niece and nephew, so I didn't mind spending time with them. But over the years, it has become expected of me to drop everything and babysit whenever my brother or his wife need a break. I remember the day Jake and his wife Sarah brought home their firstborn, little Emily. I was only 15 at the time, and I was thrilled to be an aunt. The whole family gathered at their house, cooing over the tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Mom was beside herself with joy, already planning out future family gatherings and holiday photos. Dad pretended to be stoic, but I caught him wiping away a tear when he held Emily for the first time. As the youngest in the family, I was eager to help out. I'd never really been around babies before, so everything was new and exciting. I'd sit for hours just watching Emily sleep, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. When she cried, I'd rush to pick her up, desperate to soothe her. Jake and Sarah seemed grateful for the help, and I was more than happy to provide it. Fast forward 2 years, and along came little Tommy. By then, I was 17 and had gotten pretty good at handling Emily. I thought I was prepared for another baby, but boy, was I wrong. Tommy was a handful from day one, colicky, always crying, and seeming to need constant attention. While Emily had been a relatively easy baby, Tommy tested everyone's patience. I remember one particularly rough night when Jake called me in a panic. Sarah was out of town for work, and he couldn't get Tommy to stop crying. I rushed over, still in my pajamas, to find Jake pacing the living room with a wailing Tommy in his arms. Emily was hiding under a blanket on the couch, hands over her ears. "Thank God you're here, sis," Jake said, practically shoving Tommy into my arms. "I don't know what to do. He's been crying for hours." I spent the next few hours walking Tommy around the house, singing every lullaby I knew, and eventually getting him to sleep. By the time Jake collapsed into bed, it was nearly dawn. I curled up on the couch, exhausted but feeling a sense of pride that I'd been able to help. It was moments like these that made me feel important, needed. But as time went on, these moments became less about helping out in emergencies and more about being taken for granted. I've missed out on countless plans with friends, events, and even study time because I was always being asked to babysit. They never paid me, not even a little. It's always your family, so we thought you wouldn't mind. There was the time I had to miss my best friend Lizzie's sweet 16 party because Jake and Sarah had a last-minute dinner invitation. Or the school dance I couldn't attend because Tommy had a cold and Sarah didn't want to leave him with a stranger babysitter. Each time, I swallowed my disappointment and told myself it was just part of being a good aunt and sister. But as I got older and started thinking about my own future, the constant babysitting began to wear on me. I was trying to maintain good grades, apply for colleges, and have some semblance of a social life. Yet every weekend, without fail, my phone would ring with Jake or Sarah on the other end, asking if I could watch the kids. "Come on, sis," Jake would say. "You know the kids love spending time with you. It's not like you have anything better to do, right?" But I did have better things to do. I had homework, college applications, and friends I barely saw anymore. I started to resent the assumption that my time was less valuable just because I didn't have kids of my own. The summer before I started college was particularly rough. Jake and Sarah seemed to think that since I wasn't in school, I was available 24/7 for childcare. I'd wake up to texts asking if I could come over for a few hours, which inevitably turned into entire days. My friends stopped inviting me to things because they knew I'd probably have to cancel. One day, my friend Alex called me up, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Hey, guess what? I scored tickets to the music festival next weekend. Want to come?" My heart leapt at the thought. I'd been dying to go to that festival for years, but tickets always sold out before I could get them. "Yes," I exclaimed, already mentally planning my outfit. But my excitement was short-lived. The very next day, Sarah called. "Hey, sweetie. Jake and I were thinking of taking a little weekend getaway next week. You'll be around to watch the kids, right?" My stomach dropped. Actually, I have plans next weekend. I'm sorry, but I can't babysit. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Plans? What could be more important than helping your family? I felt a twinge of guilt, but I stood my ground. I'm going to a music festival with my friends. It's been planned for a while. This was a lie, but I felt I needed some excuse. Sarah's voice turned cold. I see. Well, I guess we'll have to cancel our trip then. I hope you have fun at your little concert while we're stuck at home. The guilt gnawed at me for days after that call. I considered canceling my plans, but Alex had already bought the tickets. Plus, a small part of me felt like I deserved this one weekend of fun before heading off to college. The festival was amazing, 3 days of music, laughter, and freedom. For once, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes for messages from Jake or Sarah. I felt like a normal teenager, not a stand-in parent. But when I returned home, sunburnt and happy, the atmosphere in the family had shifted. Jake barely spoke to me at our weekly family dinner. Sarah made pointed comments about reliable family members. Even Mom seemed disappointed, asking why I couldn't have just helped out this one time. I tried to explain that it wasn't just this one time, that I'd been giving up my time for years, but no one seemed to want to hear it. It was like they'd all collectively decided that my role was to be the ever-available babysitter, and any deviation from that role was a betrayal. As summer came to an end and I prepared to leave for college, I hoped that the physical distance would help establish some boundaries. I was excited about this new chapter in my life, meeting new people, taking interesting classes, and finally having some independence. My first semester flew by in a whirlwind of new experiences. I joined a study group, made friends with my roommate, and even started dating a guy named Chris from my Psychology 101 class. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a life that was truly my own. But even miles away at college, I couldn't escape the family expectations. Jake and Sarah would call at least once a week, usually with some thinly veiled request for me to come home and babysit. The kids miss their aunt so much, Sarah would say, her voice dripping with sweetness. Are you sure you can't come home this weekend? We thought about taking them to the zoo, but they say it won't be the same without you. I'd make excuses about studying or campus events, feeling guilty but also relieved when I hung up the phone. I loved my niece and nephew, but I was finally starting to understand what it meant to have my own life. During fall break, I went home for a few days. The moment I walked through the door of my parents' house, Mom ambushed me with a calendar. I've marked all the weekends you'll be home for the next semester, she said, pointing to circled dates. Jake and Sarah could really use your help on these days. You know, since you're not around much anymore. I stared at the calendar, my heart sinking. Every single weekend I was supposed to be home was marked for babysitting. There were no days left for me to just relax or spend time with my high school friends who would also be back in town. Mom, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. I can't babysit every time I come home. I have other things I need to do, and friends I want to see. Mom's face fell. But sweetie, family comes first. Jake and Sarah rely on you. Don't you want to spend time with Emily and Tommy? Of course I wanted to spend time with the kids, but not like this. Not with every moment of my home visits planned out and allocated without my input. But looking at Mom's disappointed face, I couldn't bring myself to argue further. I just nodded and took the calendar, already dreading my next visit home. As the school year progressed, I found myself making excuses to stay at college during short breaks. I'd claim extra study sessions or work on campus. Anything to avoid going home and being immediately thrust into the role of unpaid, full-time babysitter. It was during one of these stays on campus that I met Zoe. She was a junior who lived in my dorm, and we bonded over late-night study sessions in the common room. One night, as we were taking a break from our books, she asked me why I never went home on weekends like most of the other freshmen. I hesitated, then found myself spilling the whole story. The years of babysitting, the guilt trips, the missed opportunities. Zoe listened without interrupting, her brow furrowing as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know that's not normal, right? Your brother is taking advantage of you." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Deep down, I think I had always known this, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it real. We talked for hours that night, with Zoe helping me see patterns of manipulation I had been blind to before. You need to set boundaries, she told me. It's okay to say no. You're not responsible for your brother's childcare. Armed with this new perspective, I felt more confident in standing up for myself. The next time Jake called asking me to come home for a weekend of babysitting, I took a deep breath and declined. I'm sorry, Jake, but I can't this weekend. I have a big project due and I need to focus on my studies. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Jake spoke again, his voice was cold. I see. I guess your studies are more important than your family now. College has really changed you, hasn't it? I felt a familiar pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. It's not about that, Jake. I love you and the kids, but I have my own life too. I can't always drop everything to babysit. The conversation ended on a tense note, with Jake huffing that he'd figure something out and hanging up abruptly. I felt awful, but also strangely liberated. For once, I had prioritized my own needs. Of course, word of my refusal spread quickly through the family grapevine. Mom called the next day, her voice a mixture of concern and disappointment. Honey, Jake told me what happened. Don't you think you're being a little selfish? Family should always come first. I tried to explain my position, but Mom wasn't really listening. In her mind, my refusal to babysit was a sign that I was pulling away from the family, that college was changing me for the worse. As the semester wore on, I found myself dreading calls from home. Every conversation seemed to circle back to when I'd be available to babysit, or thinly veiled comments about how I used to be so helpful before college. Even my older sister Megan, who had always been somewhat removed from the babysitting drama due to living in another state, chimed in with her opinion. You know, it wouldn't kill you to help out more, she said during one of our rare phone calls. Some of us would love to be able to spend more time with the kids. I bit back a retort about how she was welcome to fly home and babysit anytime she wanted. Instead, I just mumbled something noncommittal and changed the subject. As the school year came to a close, I faced a dilemma. I had the opportunity to take a summer internship that would be great for my future career, but it would mean staying near campus instead of going home. I knew that if I went home, I'd be expected to be the full-time babysitter all summer. After much deliberation and several pep talks from Zoe, I decided to take the internship. Telling my family was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I chose to do it in person, driving home one weekend in late April. As I sat at the dining room table with Mom, Dad, Jake, and Sarah, I felt like I was facing a firing squad. I've been offered a summer internship, I began, my voice shaking slightly. It's a great opportunity, and I've decided to accept it. But it means I won't be coming home for the summer. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face crumpled in disappointment. Dad looked confused, as if he couldn't quite understand what I was saying. But it was Jake who broke the silence, his voice tight with anger. So that's it, huh? You're just abandoning your family. What are we supposed to do for childcare all summer? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Jake, I'm not abandoning anyone. This internship is important for my future. And you and Sarah managed childcare before I was old enough to babysit. I'm sure you can figure it out again. Sarah scoffed. Figure it out? Do you have any idea how expensive full-time childcare is? That's not her problem, Sarah, Dad said, surprising me by coming to my defense. She's right. You two managed before, and you'll manage again. Jake turned on Dad. Oh, so you're taking her side now? Whatever happened to families sticking together? The conversation devolved from there, with everyone talking over each other. Mom was in tears, Jake was shouting, and Sarah kept making snide comments about how some people just didn't understand the challenges of parenting. I sat there, feeling overwhelmed and attacked from all sides. Part of me wanted to give in, to say I'd come home and help out just to stop the fighting. But I held firm, repeating that I was taking the internship and that was final. When I left that evening, the atmosphere was frosty to say the least. Mom hugged me goodbye, but it felt stiff and formal. Jake and Sarah had already left, taking the kids with them without so much as a goodbye. Only Dad seemed somewhat supportive, telling me he was proud of me for pursuing my goals. The drive back to campus was lonely, filled with doubts and second-guessing. Was I doing the right thing? Was I really being selfish, as they all seemed to think? But as the summer progressed and I threw myself into my internship, I knew I'd made the right choice. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I was learning so much. For the first time, I felt like I was on a path to a future that I had chosen for myself. Of course, things at home didn't magically get better. Jake and Sarah found alternative childcare arrangements, but they made sure I knew how much of a burden it was. Every call home included some mention of how expensive the babysitter was, or how the kids were always asking why Aunt Emma didn't want to see them anymore. It hurt to hear these things, but I tried to stay strong. I made an effort to video chat with Emily and Tommy regularly, sending them little gifts and postcards to let them know I was thinking of them. But it was hard to maintain a relationship with them when their parents seemed determined to paint me as the bad guy. As the summer drew to a close and my sophomore year approached, I found myself both dreading and looking forward to going home for a brief visit before school started. I missed my family, despite everything, but I was anxious about the reception I would receive. My fears weren't unfounded. The atmosphere at home was tense from the moment I arrived. Mom was polite but distant, clearly still hurt by my decision to stay away for the summer. Jake and Sarah had brought the kids over, but they barely spoke to me, communicating mostly in curt nods and monosyllabic responses. It was during this visit that things finally came to a head. I was in the kitchen, helping Mom prepare dinner, when Jake cornered me. "So," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "how was your fancy internship? Learn a lot while you were abandoning your family responsibilities?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It was great, actually. And I wasn't abandoning anything, Jake. I was pursuing my education and career goals." Jake scoffed. "Right, because that's so much more important than family." Something in me snapped. All the frustration, resentment, and hurt I'd been holding back for years came pouring out. "You know what, Jake? Yes, it is important. I'm allowed to have my own life, my own goals. I love Emily and Tommy, but I'm their aunt, not their parent. It's not fair to expect me to put my life on hold to provide free childcare whenever you want it." Jake's face turned red with anger. "How dare you?" But I cut him off. "No, how dare you? How dare you make me feel guilty for wanting to live my own life? How dare you take advantage of me for years and then act like I'm the bad guy for setting boundaries?" The kitchen fell silent. Mom had stopped chopping vegetables and was staring at us, wide-eyed. I could hear Sarah in the living room, trying to distract the kids from the argument. Jake opened his mouth to retort, but Dad walked in at that moment. He must have heard the commotion because he looked between Jake and me with concern. "What's going on here?" he asked. Before Jake could speak, I took a deep breath and said, "We're having a long overdue conversation about boundaries and expectations." To my surprise, Dad nodded. "I think that's a conversation we all need to have as a family. Why don't we sit down after dinner and talk this through calmly?" That evening, we had the most honest family discussion we'd had in years. There were tears, raised voices, and uncomfortable silences. But slowly, painfully, we started to understand each other's perspectives. I explained how overwhelmed and taken for granted I had felt. Jake and Sarah admitted that they had relied on me too much and apologized for not respecting my time and goals. Mom acknowledged that she had put unfair pressure on me to always put family first, even at the expense of my own needs. It wasn't a magical fix. There were still hurt feelings and lingering resentments. But it was a start. We agreed to set clearer boundaries and expectations going forward. I would still help with the kids when I could, but it would be on my terms, and Jake and Sarah promised to be more considerate of my schedule and commitments. As I headed back to college for my sophomore year, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, changing long-established family dynamics never is. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about my relationship with my family. I knew there would still be challenges and difficult conversations ahead. But I also knew that I had found my voice and the strength to stand up for myself. And that, I realized, was the most important lesson of all.